Writer Pak Kyongni has a special place in Korean literature, having depicted the pain and sorrow in people's lives and parts of Korean history. So in honor of her works, each year an award is given. Today on our interview, we'll meet with this year's recipient, American writer, Mr. Richard Ford. The novel Independence Day follows the story of one Frank Bascombe, a real estate agent, through an Independence Day weekend. It won its author, Richard Ford, both the Pulitzer Prize and Faulkner Prize in 1996 for the very first time in the history of American literature. His name is now squarely in the American literary canon. Critics have praised him as the most American author, one who portrays the very essence of American realism. 42 years on from his 1976 debut with A Piece of My Heart, Richard Ford continues to write and to collect international literary awards. Just this year, he has won prizes in Italy, Germany, and Korea, where he is the recipient of the Pak Kyongni Prize. The writer, who has spent more than half of his life with a pen in his hand, the interview meets Richard Ford, a towering giant of America's contemporary literature, to hear what novel means in today's world. Well, it's great to have you on our program. Thank you so much.
It's a thrill to get to be on your program.
Now, congratulations, first of all, on your winning the Pak Kyongni Prize. How did it feel when you first found out that you were the recipient?
It felt like a miracle. I've never been to Korea before. It was hard for me to think that anybody in Korea was reading books of mine, even though I have a wonderful publisher. You just don't hear about it necessarily. I live in a very remote part of the United States, in the state of Maine, in the woods, basically. So it just seemed like something I couldn't fantasize about.
What do you know about Pak Kyongni and her literature? And I know you've read some of her notable works.
I read a lot of Toji. There is a lot of Toji to read.
Right, in short volume.
700 characters.
Right.
I know that book principally. America suffers hugely for not translating other cultures, other languages, other nations' literatures. This work was new to me, so I went at it with a lot of patience, because this book requires a good deal of patience, loving patience. And then I did the thing that any normal human being would do. I started reading on Google and looking people up, and I asked a couple of my Korean students at Columbia University, where I'm professor, to tell me some things that they knew. And so little by little I found out. But since I've been here, since I've been at the foundation, I've learned a great deal more. I've gone to her house. I've seen films of her life. So it's been a gradual accumulation of familiarity.
And you won her prize, named after her.
Yes,
so.
And it does me great honor.
Right.
But what it really does honor to is how much Koreans care about not only their literary history, but their writers in general. That, for me, is what I take. When I come to Korea, when I come any place away from home, what I come to do is to learn something. So since I've been here, I've been able to learn.
This autumn, the residents of the late Pak Kyongni once again bustled with excitement as it hosted an award ceremony for the Pak Kyongni Prize. The late Pak, who passed away in 2008, is one of the greatest names in Korean modern literature, still respected and admired by many Koreans. Pak herself lived through the tempest of Korea's contemporary history, which she so masterfully portrayed in her works. Toji, or Land, Pak's magnum opus in 5 parts, took 26 years to complete. It's praised as one of the greatest achievements of Korean literature. The eponymous Pak Kyongni Prize was established in 2011 to commemorate her achievements and spirit. It's awarded annually to a writer of the age who has upheld the value of literature and made a great impact on world literature. This year, the prize went to Richard Ford.
I come from a part of the world, Mississippi in the United States, which is famous for celebrating its writers, William Faulkner, Eudora Welty, Richard Wright, and I can tell you that what writers would most like to do and would most like our work to accomplish is to prove itself useful to its readership, to be able to have our work renew sensuous and emotional life, be able to refresh the language we all depend on, be able to imagine new intelligence and awareness, and to affirm life by making lived life be our subject.
매일 신문 보면은 폭탄 터지는 데가 무수하고 사람들 상하는 데도 많은데 그런 가운데서 어떻게 보통 사람이 그래도 건전하게 살 수 있느냐. 단지 그날 뭐 잘 산다는 것보다도 자기 삶도 건전하게 살면서 또 그렇게 크게 잘못된 일을 안 하면서 살 수 있느냐. 이런 것들을 그린 게 많은 것 같아요. 그래서 그게 우리 심사위원들한테도 호소력을 갖지 않았나 이런 생각이 듭니다.
Well, you've been awarded many prizes, including
I'm
the
old.
Pulitzer Prize, the Andrew Carnegie Medal, and the Fitzgerald Award for Achievement in American Literature, just to name a few. And why do you think your literary work resonates with so many people and is recognized by so many organizations?
Other than that, I'm just a genius? Beyond that?
Beyond that, please.
Beyond that. Well, I try to write books that a 19-year-old could read. I try to write books that take the most important things I know and make them accessible. And also, if I'm any good at it, make them beautiful. I'm trying to write books that can be read. I wouldn't write books at my age if I didn't think I had a readership. I think that I am an ordinary enough man that the things that I care about are the things that readers in general care about. Life and death, intimacy, family life, failures of intimacy, all of those things that transpire in our lives every day.
Sure. But how do these recognitions affect you professionally and personally?
Well, they encourage me. They make me think that I haven't wasted the last 50 years of my life. And they make me think that literature is of consequence to both a reading public in the United States and a reading public all over the world. I mean, one is flattered and one is honored, but you have to be sure that the good things that happen to you encourage you. And in my case, it means to write better, try to get better at what I do, and to write another book maybe. You get old. I'm 74, I'm not terribly old. So my Korean students in the United States always tell me I'm old.
They remind you?
They remind me all the time.
Unnecessarily, perhaps.
But when you've used up a lot of your life writing books, you've also used up a lot of material writing books.
Sure.
And so you could just as easily think to yourself, well, this is getting too hard to find things to write about. Maybe I should just step back from it. And I try every time I finish a book to step away, to say to myself, well, okay, is this the end of it? Have you done it now? In the last year, I've not done very much. But I finally realized that partly through the encouragement of this prize, maybe I could write another book.
Now, some of your books that have been translated and published in Korea are the Sportswriter, Canada, the Independence Day as well. Now, how do you make the selection of books that are published or that you want introduced in a certain country?
The publisher makes that determination.
I see, I see.
I have nothing to say about it other than hooray. You know, that's all I have to say.
Just go with the flow.
Yeah, I mean, but the publishers are thinking about that very subject. They're trying to say, well, here's a writer who has a readership in America. What can we do? How can we make a choice of books, first, second, third, that will make it possible for him or her to have a readership in Korea? So it's not my call.
Are there books that have not been introduced in this market that you want particularly, that you want Korean readers to have access to, or that you have personal attachment to, perhaps?
Minjung, I would be happy if all my books were published in Korea because I tried my best with all of the books that I've written, 12 or 13, to make them as good as I could possibly make them. And I have no particular misgivings about any of them.
Okay.
And I haven't written that many books, but the ones that I wrote really hard. And I worked at the best I could possibly work. So I'd be happy for the first book I ever wrote back in 1976 to be read by Koreans. And I would think to myself, good, piece of my heart. Yeah.
Now, many Koreans who've read your book say that the books make them think.
Oh dear. That's why I'm not rich.
See? How do you want your books to be received by the readers?
Well, I want books to be useful. And I want them to be read from end to end. I want all the words to be read. And if I write a book and a Korean reader reads all the words, that's all I ask. Because if they read all the words, then I have the best chance to make that book useful. But I can't control what that reader thinks. I can't control whether that reader likes it or doesn't like it. I wrote it hoping that they would like it and read it all. But every reader is different. I try not to worry about anything but that there be no discrepancy between what I intended and what the reader understands I intended. And if I can say that happens, then I don't have any wishes beyond that.
Sure, sure. Now, when your work is translated to another language, I'm sure as an author, there are concerns that you might have. I want to know what those are and how you make sure they are addressed.
Well, I try to suppress those concerns as much as possible because I only know 2 other languages besides American. I know Spanish pretty well, and I know French pretty well. But even then, knowing the language, I can't be sophisticated enough to know how the French culture or the Spanish-speaking culture will entertain my books. So there is an immense amount of trust involved with translation. As we were saying before, you translate a book into another culture's language, but into another culture's assumptions. And that necessarily means it's a great deal more complicated than just finding a word that means the same word in Korean. So I can't really, as a non-Korean speaking human being, even approach what it might be to translate my books into Korean. So I try not to worry about it. You know, a person, to be able to function at all, you, me, anybody, we have to not worry about some things.
Korean writers face this as well, that limitations in translating their work into English, and which would have a bigger market, obviously. What efforts do you think can be made to make sure least is lost in translation?
Pay translators more money. That's because I think that's probably the thing that causes translations to be deficient, is that translators have to work too hard. They have to do too much. They have to do too much work. They're translating 2 or 3 books at a time. If you paid translators more, if you revered their work more, translations would be better. As you can see, I am a firm proponent of translation and a firm believer and advocate for translators. Because it is through the magic of translation that books travel across oceans, travel across nation-state boundaries, and prove to the world that we are not so different as we might think.
Sure. I've read many descriptions of you, and one of them was that you're the most American writer who depicts American society meticulously with a very sharp eye. I guess in general, is that a fair description of you?
Well, it's nothing I've ever thought of, because to be an American, it's all I am. So if I write books about, mostly books about things that are American, I guess I cannot be anything else. And I wouldn't say that I'm more American than George Carl Oates or Don DeLillo or Cormac McCarthy. I think they are about as American as I am. I've also had people tell me that I'm the most European of American writers, which somehow flatters me more. Because I grew up, like a lot of my generation did, reading European novels in translation. And so a lot of my sensibilities about books came from reading European literature in translation.
I see. But some of the families, some of the couples, some of the people who appear in your books, they are pretty American. I guess that's why people say, and the lives that they lead and the family struggles that they go through are pretty universal, yet very American too.
Well, that probably means more to you as a non-American than it means to me as an American. I'm just trying to write a good story. But I mean, I put people of other races in my books. I put people of other nationalities in my books as much as possible. But that's very American also, because America is a very diverse society. So to have African Americans or Asians or subcontinental Indians would seem to me about as American as just having white guys like me.
Most of the characters in your books are ordinary people just doing ordinary things.
Yeah.
What do you want to convey by having these people as your protagonists?
Convey is probably not the word I would use, but I would say make up, imagine. I guess I would like to have my readers think that those ordinary lives that you mentioned are worth our attention, and that we are better off as functioning human beings when we affirm more of life, particularly when we affirm life that we might otherwise be moved by convention to not notice. I think we're better off when we notice more. I think that literature does a service to mankind when it says, here, look at this. You thought you understood this. You don't understand this as well as I can tell you that you do now. So that's, I suppose, what I'm trying to do. I mean, as far as my work's relationship to lived life is concerned, I want to try to find a way to affirm lived life.
Do you see yourself in any of these characters and the life choices that they make?
Well, I guess I'd have to, but I'm not writing about myself. I feel like I'm a better writer when I don't write about myself. And I'm always shocked when I write a character or write a line of dialogue which I actually personally agree with.
I see.
You know, T.S. Eliot, one of our great poets, said that writers run from their personalities. And in
Run
a way,
away.
yes, run away from their personalities. In other words, we as writers are better when we're not just writing about ourselves, but when we're trying to invent other than ourselves. It strains our imagination more, it tests our intelligence, it gives more to the reader when we do that. So when I find myself agreeing, when I find myself maybe a fleck here, a fleck there in my own books, I sometimes just try to take it out.
Have you ever written a dialogue that surprises you because it's something you would never say or you would never think?
All the time.
All the time?
All the time. Yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to answer this question. When I am writing a line of dialogue, I don't ask myself, what would my character say? I ask myself, what can I make my character say? And I can make my character say an enormous, broadly ranged choice. Whereas if I ask myself, what would my character say, then I'm working within a much too narrow range of possibilities. So for me, it's always trying to push the sides of possibility out, and that inevitably means to push the sides away from what I myself know.
The Franks in your books, now, why that particular name and what significance does that name have in?
Just a name I liked. You know,
Simple as that.
when you name a character, particularly the principal character in a book, what that means is that the reader is going to see that name over and over and over and over again. And so I thought Frank was a name that sounded good in the American's ear. Because, because you're going to see it all the time. Then it has to be pleasing to your ear. It also has to be slightly provocative to you. Not provocative so as to stop you, but interesting. And so frank is a word which in English it means candid. It means telling you the truth.
Sure.
And so I suppose I chose that word because it complied with those kinds of requirements. But mostly it's the first. Mostly it's that I like the word, I like the sound of it, and it's going to be in the reader's ear for 400 pages. It better be something they can tolerate. And it's completely arbitrary.
Sure. Now, your books deal with a lot of family issues, and in this day and age of breakdown of families in a way, from big families to nuclear families and single households, what do you think the theme of family, and you're dealing with this issue, this whole theme, what do you want to deliver? What do you want to say?
I think that the family is the laboratory for all of moral life. The family is where we learn about what's good and bad first. The family is where we act out what we learn and unlearn and know and don't know about what's good and bad. I want to write about what's good and what's bad and what people do and do badly and do well. So the family is the most plausible circumstance for those kinds of activities and those kinds of dramas. And so I want to make everything happen that I can make happen in families so that I can, in essence, experiment with all of the moral issues that circulate within families. Other than that, you know, I had a great family. I had a wonderful family. It was just me, my mother, my father. We loved each other intensely. I think I revere the family. For me, the family is the unit of civilized life that is the most enduring. So it then falls under the rubric of me writing about the most important thing I know. And the most important thing I know is what happens in families.
Right. Well, you talk about right and wrong and moral values, but in the families that you depict, that you write about, a lot of them come from broken families.
Yes.
or they're divorces.
Yes.
And messy relationship in a way.
Yes.
So why so?
Well, I'm not trying to write role models. I don't know what role models are. I'm trying to write things about families with which a reader can have a secure conversation. Within the confinement of a book, you can have all kinds of conversation, by which I mean you can say when you see something happening in a book, you can say, ooh, that's bad. Or you can say, that's not as bad as I thought it was. Or there's something good about this that I didn't know. And so that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying, again, to hold up model families. I'm trying to commence a book with the notion of a family and then just rig it around. See what I can make happen that's surprising. See what I can make happen that's plausible. See what I can make happen that's interesting and beautiful. I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that I come to the end of a story, or I come to the end of a whole novel in which Frank Bascom is the narrator. And the question I ask myself is, what can I say as I get to the end of the book that redeems the experience of the book for the reader?
Do you want to have moral lessons?
When you say moral lessons, what I think is something that I knew beforehand that I want to deliver to the reader. I don't want to deliver to the reader anything that I knew beforehand, because I think if I can make a book be kind of exciting morally, which is to say to bring the reader to the cutting edge of moral life. In other words, what is the consequence of this? And to create some new sense of consequence. That's what I'm trying to do, rather than say, you should do this, or you should do that, or good families are this way. I don't know that, because truthfully, I really don't know that.
The movie Wildlife
Yes.
is directed by Paul Dano, is based on your novel of the same name. How involved were you in the making of this movie, or did you write
Zero.
Okay.
Zero. I didn't want to be involved in it. And when Paul and I talked, he made both a very compelling case for how invested he was in the book. Not that that was a requirement for me. The requirement for me was that he paid me. but I was impressed both by his investment in the book, and I was impressed by him as an actor. He's a wonderful actor. And then I had that to go with, and his investment in the book to go with, and then I met him, and he's a lovely young man, and I just thought, I'm just going to get out of your way. What I'm going to do is just say, my book is intact, my book will be invaluable. Now you take whatever you want from my book, or as little as you want from my book, if it's only the title, and make the best possible film you can make without any overseeing from me. And he did. He did.
You've watched it.
I've seen it twice. I'll see it again when I get home. Because I did a few things with him in New York to publicize the film. The film's quite lovely. It's quite lovely. So a couple of wonderful performances.
So you debuted in 1976 with
Yes.
Piece of My Heart.
Yes, an overnight success at 32.
Wow.
Most people write their first books when they're 25.
No, 32 is still...
I thought at the time, God, it's taken you forever to do this. I started trying to be a writer in 1968, and then I was 8 years. The first 3, 4 of them just literally floundering. And then finally, after about 4 years, I thought, you're not succeeding at this. You'd better quit floundering and get yourself attached to write a serious big novel, and learn to be a writer by writing one book, not learn to be a writer by writing the odd short story. So, and my wife thought it was a great idea to be a writer, so I had her approval all these years. I'm slow. I've always been slow. I'm slow at everything. So I couldn't be a lawyer, even though I trained to be a lawyer. I couldn't be a lot of things, but I could be a novelist.
No, so looking back, you wouldn't have changed a thing.
No, I'm not the person who looks back and wants to change things. I think you did what you did when you did it, so live with it, you know. You make mistakes, you go in the wrong direction, you do your best. If you don't do your best, I mean, I've known people who were writers, who were my colleagues, who really didn't do their best. They wrote books that they let go of too soon, or they wrote books that they shouldn't have written, or they wrote books that they didn't work on hard enough. I would hate that. I think I would not be able to live with myself if I thought I hadn't done my best, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's always great, but it is always as great as I can make it.
But perseverance, in a way, is not, I guess, as a writer, it's not something, if you persevere, you'll get there, right?
No, but you can almost guarantee yourself if you don't persevere, you won't get there.
So true. It's a word of wisdom right there. Now, you've dabbled in many different areas as well. Like you said, you had a little bit of you studied law.
Yes.
Attended law school, and you're a sports writer as
Yes.
well. How do you think these experiences affected you?
Well, legal training certainly made me a very close reader, and it made me a good questioner of myself. It made me rather heartless in questioning myself, in finding fault with myself. If you don't do that in the law, you don't succeed in the law. So I am a harsh critic of what I do, and I never feel as satisfied with what I do as even I hope the reader will feel. The sports writing part was just fun. And it probably was not until I wrote sports for some time that I really could think that being a writer is not as hard as I thought it was. That being a writer, when I hear writers say that they work really hard and that it's very difficult to be a writer, I think, there's so many harder jobs than being a writer. I don't want those jobs. And I work at my work as strenuously as I can. but finally it's not digging ditches. It's not rocket science. It's not flying airplanes. It's not performing cancer surgery. It's a lot easier.
Well, you say that because you've already accomplished so much, but as someone
but I say it because it's true, and I want, by saying it, for other young people who would be writers to think to themselves, this is the thing a human being can do. You know, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that being a cancer surgeon was something anybody could do. Anybody can, or at least many more people than we would like to believe, can be a novelist. I always say to my students, monkeys write novels.
Do monkeys write novels?
Yeah, all the time.
How much time do you spend on each sentences? And I mean, you make it sound so easy, like everyone can write.
Well, it's, you know, I write with a pen, sometimes with a pencil, and I just don't leave a sentence till I think it's good. And sometimes that's right away, and sometimes it takes a while. A lot of scratchings out. I don't write on a computer because computer happens too fast. I can type a lot faster than I can think. But then after I leave something, because I've thought it was good and satisfactory, I see it again in a month or again in a week, and I want to make it better. So it's hard to put the clock on that. Sometimes it works really fast, sometimes it works very slowly. Yeah.
How do you overcome a writer's block?
By not being smart enough to agree that you can even have one.
So you just keep on.
Yeah. When I don't want to write, I say Richard doesn't want to write. Rather than saying, oh, there's some force out in the universe that's preventing me from doing this, it's driving me crazy. I'm not smart enough to have a writer's block.
Just put the pen down and just go
go
for
do
a walk?
something else. Go take a walk. Go watch a baseball game.
Now, I understand you had a mild form of dyslexia.
Yes.
How did you overcome that, and how did that affect you?
Well, I probably didn't overcome it. I accommodated it. You're right when you say mild. There are forms of dyslexia and degrees of dyslexia that are absolutely transformative in your life. Mine just meant that I was a very slow reader. And for many years, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know why other kids could read faster than I could. But what I came to understand was that I was just going to have to work harder than the other kids. I was going to have to find a virtue in something that seemed to be a vice or a disability. And in the process of doing that, I found that in my reading, when I read slowly, I became interested in and sensitive to all kinds of things in language that I had not been sensitive to, and that people who read more swiftly maybe never get sensitive to, which is to say, all of the poetic qualities of language, how sentences sound and how words look and how many vowels a sentence has or how many consonants. And readers, when they read novels or poems, they read those things. They experience those things, whether it's subliminally or frontally. And so I began to find in literature at the slow pace that I read beauties that I had never found before. And so that's what I did. I made a virtue out of a vice.
Sure. Now, one of the surveys done in Korea showed that writers and journalists are some of the most short-lived professions. How do you think you survived that and you kept on going? You're going strong.
Luck.
Luck.
Luck. My wife. That's about it. Luck, my wife, and a rather healthy fear of failure. I had failed at so many things when I was young that when I finally, at age 23, 24, assigned myself the task of trying to be a writer, I think I worked at doing that harder than I'd ever worked at anything because I was very fearful of failure. And so normally, or maybe conventionally, fear of failure is thought to be a negative experience. For me, it was inspirational. It made me work really hard. And because it's just, I can work really hard. I learned how to work really hard by overcoming dyslexia and accommodating dyslexia. So my wife, luck, hard work, you know. What do they say? Well, what's the old line? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice.
Now, when you work on a work of fiction, which order do you tackle first?
For me, to write a novel means to accumulate an immense amount of what I think of as raw material. And that raw material is of all sorts. Raw material of who a character might be, raw material of what the book might be about, raw material of where it could be set. So when I'm spending a year anticipating a book that I will write, I'm pretty well immersed in all of those formalities of the book. And they just kind of grow, character, plot, theme, incrementally. And so that by the time a year goes by, I have a fairly well worked out idea of all of those things. So it's not what's first. It's me being immersed in all of it, all the time.
And you weave them together?
Yeah,
Or,
I do. That's a pretty good word. I would have always used the word mosaical. Most readers or people who don't know about writing books think that writing books is linear. And indeed, you do write from the beginning to the end. And yet, it's more mosaical than it is linear. You're fitting together things that people say and then answer, things that people think and then what is the consequence of what they think. You're fitting together things that haven't been fitted together before. So in that way, it's like the tiles on this floor. You're putting together things all the time.
Do you sometimes make changes as you go along the plot?
All the time.
All the time?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's no reason that you should know all that you will know about your book at the beginning. So typically what I do is I do a day of writing, and maybe I write a chapter, and then I type it. And then as I proceed beyond there, I will read that chapter again. And every time I read that chapter, I'll make some little mark on it, or I'll take something out, or I'll think of something later and I'll stick it in. So that it's kind of growing from the inside out at that point.
Sure.
So yeah, my mind, I don't know about your mind, my mind is pretty much a chaos.
Same here.
Yeah, so it's throwing off things for me to think about randomly. And I'm snatching them out of the air and writing them down and sticking them in my book, but through no order particularly.
How do you choose your main characters?
By hearing a tone of voice expressed on a written line, and by determining if I can make that character think and say and act in ways that contain the most important things I want the book to contain. And then again, that becomes a character, a tone of voice, a line of dialogue, a place where this occurs. So it's not as if I sort of outline a character and then give him a mustache and give him eye color or her long hair or blonde hair or short hair. It's much more like sculpture, where you pinch up a little bit of this and you suppress a little bit of that, and it becomes a human figure from the inside out.
Do your characters change in their characters as the story develops?
I want them to stay for as long as I can, as fluid as I can make them. Because characters are not human beings. And readers don't think that they're human beings, really. Readers understand characters to be pieces of artifice made of language. And they are perhaps even more mutable than a human being is mutable. So I depend on characters to understand, rather I depend on readers to understand what they are doing when they encounter a character. They're not encountering a human being as I'm encountering you, as you are encountering me. They're encountering something that's made up out of language, quite artificially.
Now, even though your books are rather long,
Some are.
Some are. I mean, there are short stories too, but some books. And readers say that your sentences pull them in. So how do you make sure to keep your readers engaged and focused?
Well, by always remembering that you're writing this book so that some stranger will read it to the end. And by having a reader's experience myself, and by understanding what it is in sentences that pleases me, and to understand that I can be pleased by sentences. What I learned over the course of my life is that what I like most about books is not plots, it's not even interesting characters. I like books that contain new knowledge. That if a book can somehow arrive at some new knowledge for me, and novels have all kinds of ways of doing this, then I'm interested and I like it. So I'm writing sentences all the time in which I'm thinking to myself, does this say anything new? Does this tell the reader something that the reader didn't know before and would like to know and need to know? Is this fresh? Is this beautiful? I'm asking that question. I'm not just assuming I'm doing it, I'm asking it. And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer better be no.
Right.
Because you're not being tough enough on yourself.
A book cafe in Seoul, Richard Ford is meeting his Korean fans. Many of his works have been translated into Korean. Independence Day is one of them, and it has been republished in Korea for the first time in 22 years.
In Haddam, summer floats over tree-softened streets like a sweet lotion balm from a careless, languorous god, and the world falls in tune with its own mysterious anthems.
뭔가 이렇게 드라마틱한 어떤 소설을 읽는 걸 좋아하는 독자들이라면 처음 읽었을 때는 조금 심심하다고 느껴질 수 있는데 작품을 자세히 들여다보고 하면 포드 작가가 80년대 미국에 대해서 어떤 생각을 가지고 있고 미국의 곳곳의 그 지역적인 특성과 문화와 보통 사람들의 삶 이런 것에 대해서 굉장히 깊은 성찰들을 하고 있는 걸 발견할 수 있어요.
포드 선생님의 관심은 뭐 일반적으로 얘기하는 그런 어떤 비범한 능력을 가진 어떤 영웅이 아니고 우리 같은 보통 사람이기 때문에 독자분들은 자기 일처럼 특히 좀 연배가 비슷하거나 주인공과 연배가 비슷하거나 아니면 좀 비슷한 상황에 있는 분들이라면 좀 더 공감을 하면서 재미있게 읽으실 수 있을 거라고 생각이 들어요.
The book concert saw some passionate discussion between Richard Ford and his fans who've long held both admirations and questions for the author.
If I write down the word tree,
개인의 삶의 태도를 투영하신 것인지.
But there's no getting around the fact that he is being overwhelmed by his circumstances.
리처드 포드 작가님 자체가 평범한 사람의 삶의 가치에 대해서 많이 생각하시는 분인 것 같아요. 그게 뭔가 비범하거나 특별하게 그려지는 게 아니라 그냥 각자가 쓰고 있는, 살고 있는 이야기들 속에서 어떤 의미를 전달하려고 하시는 것 같아서
타인의 관심을 갖지 않는 세상하고 아주 다르게 좀 더 타인과 자신의 삶을 좀 더 진실되게 느끼려는 그런 태도인 것 같아서 거기에 저는 감명을 많이 받았습니다.
Critics often say that Richard Ford is the most American writer, but the agony of the modern man which he depicts has spoken to readers all around the world across different cultures. Do you think you have more to offer as a writer now that you are more advanced in age?
Well, all old people think they're smart. There's no doubt about that. And they're probably wrong. So I really don't. But I'm trying to be useful. I'm trying to, again, put into my books some new awareness, some new intelligence. And I'm trying probably harder than I used to, because it took me a long time over the course of my writing life to realize that that's what I cared about the most.
Mm-hmm. Now, in this day and age, everyday people can express their opinion on a novel very freely on the internet as well.
Yes.
Do you pay any attention to that, or do you just disregard it as
Zero.
Zero.
I've never looked myself up on Google. I've never read a blog. I've never read one online opinion ever expressed about anything I ever wrote. It could make me really angry, and therefore I would be unhappy for a day. So I have enough things to be unhappy about. I don't need to add to them.
Or things to be happy about.
I have lots of things to be happy about. I've won this Toji Prize. What could make a human being happier? But no, I don't go looking for trouble when it comes to reviews or what people have said about me or what people don't like about me. I just concede that there's a lot of things you wouldn't like about me. And, but my wife will tell me. I mean, she'll tell me if I'm off base. She'll tell me if I'm acting badly. I don't need to have some stranger tell me. I don't care.
Sure. When you publish a new book,
Yes.
do you ever think, oh, this might not do well?
Yes. I always think that. I always think that.
Has that happened before?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Wildlife. Wildlife is a perfectly good example.
Well, it's turned into a movie.
30 years later. You know, it stayed in print for all those years, but when it was published, it didn't get good reviews. That was the last book that I ever published in which I read the reviews, and it didn't get good reviews, and it seemed to be a failure as a publishing enterprise. But it managed to stay in print. There's instruction there. It has had lots of people trying to make a movie out of it over the years, and so you have to try to find a way to take the long view, even though you are almost entirely committed to the short view, which is to say, the view of what you're doing today. It's sort of balancing in your brain the long view and the present view.
I want to know how much you read and who your favorite author is.
Well, fortunately, I don't have to have a favorite author because all books have to be excellent. And fortunately, there are a lot of excellent books, and mine, if it's an excellent book, just fits in to that long cavalcade of good books. And so I've read lots of books in my life, even as slow as I am, and I find excellence everywhere in books. I find it to be extremely encouraging. So I wouldn't want to choose one book over another book because there are so many excellent books in the world that I wouldn't probably remember the right one. I'd forget the one that mattered the most to me. But in general, these hierarchical ideas of what's best and what's less than best, I kind of like things like that rather than like that. I want to look across a plain and see a lot, not always be looking up to see what's best.
Is there a book you're reading right now, traveling with?
I actually just read the Korean writer Han Kang's two books that are published in America.
The one
The
who
Vegetarian
won the
that won the Booker.
Right.
And one called Human Action, which is about the massacre in the South.
Sure.
So I read those. I find them both to be remarkable, grave books in their own way, very, very different in tone and how she navigates the material. So those are two excellent books that I've just read recently. I also have, I guess I am speaking of Korean writers. I had a student named wonderful name, Crystal Hana Kim, who just published a book in the United States, which is just a spectacular book.
I see. Now, many books are published, every day, and many books focus on management and business and self-help books out there these days as well. What do you think a novelist or a novel plays? What role do you think it plays in this day and age?
The premise of a novel, which is to say, upon what basic action does the story embark, can be quite useful to a reader because almost always the premise of a novel has some implausibility in it. And that from that implausibility, the novel draws a certain amount of torque or power, and it instructs the reader about what is possible in the world to be interested in. So those self-help books that you're describing, and they have a place in the world, they're generally trying to trade upon information that is previously known to the writer but not previously known to the reader. In my books, I think the premise of the book is not previously known to the writer until I invent it, and definitely not previously known to the reader until she or he reads it. So to understand what might be interesting, whereas before you didn't think this was interesting, that's useful to a reader. There's a wonderful story by Anton Chekhov called The Lady with the Pet Dog. It's kind of a classic Russian short story. It's about two people who meet in Yalta on the Black Sea, and they have a kind of desultory love affair. They're both married. It's an adulterous love affair. And as you're reading it, you might be thinking to yourself, I wouldn't be interested in these people if I met them. If somebody told me across the lunch table about this happening to somebody that they knew, I probably wouldn't think it's interesting. But Chekhov makes it interesting. Chekhov makes us look at something we didn't think would be interesting and makes it be interesting and makes it be revelatory about human life in a way. So that's useful to a reader. Look at this. You didn't think this was interesting? It is. It is. Even though they are shabby, desultory, adulterous, not admirable at all, Chekhov makes them the subject of his story, and therefore the reader thinks, there are things in the world that I may be assuming wrongly about. That's very useful. At least as useful as a self-help book about how to do well in the stock market.
Is there a genre or a theme that you haven't tackled that you want to explore in your future work?
Well, there's a book I would write if I were confident that I was going to live long enough. One more Frank Bascom book I would write about, which would be the last Frank Bascom book. But it's sad. And it's not sad because it's the last. It's sad because of what takes place in the book. I have years of notes for it. I would write that book if I could. I may not write it because I can't at my age, and I don't want to keep reverting to the fact that I'm the age I am. A lot of people are a lot older than I am and live a long time. But I don't want to embark on a book that I can't finish, that I feel confident that I can't finish just by surviving. So I haven't felt that I could both do that and also undertake the sadness that is endemic to this book. I just haven't wanted to do that yet. So I'm doing something else.
Sure. Now do share with us your future plans as we wrap up this interview.
I'm writing a little novel called And I Am in Retirement from Love. And it's a comic novel which is set on a university campus in Michigan in the United States. And I'm writing a book of short stories, which I'm almost finished with, called The Irish in America, which is about sort of embedded Irish people who live in the United States, who have Irish heritage and are all but invisible. So if I haven't made that sound completely dull, I will keep trying to work on it until I finish it.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you
I've
today.
completely enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a thought-provoking conversation I had with Mr. Richard Ford, who is the recipient of this year's Pak Kyongni Prize. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for watching.